So on this episode, we're joined by singer, songwriter, and educator Machan Taylor, who has graced the stages with the likes of Pat Benatar, Foreigner, Pink Floyd, Sting, Government Mule, and so many more. Machan, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. It makes me tired hearing all that.
Well, that's just a little snapshot of your resume. When you look at your website,
Yeah.
it's really long, and then you keep going on and you see all these great things on movies and TV commercials, and you got quite the storied history. So, listen, you have a great back history, having performed and recorded with so many of these legendary rock bands, and you're also a teacher, which is quite impressive. So, just quickly up front, tell us how you became a study trained and certified vocalologist.
Well, that being a teacher was never in my plan. And this is like a chapter in my life in the last actually in the last 20 years or so, but there's a bit of a long story that I don't need to go into the whole length of the story, but um, the last big tour that I did was sort of 1999, 2000 with Sting. And there were a number of things that transpired during that tour and afterwards that kind of changed the trajectory of my life at that point. And I decided to go back to school. I went back to college. I had never gone to college when I was 18. I was a working singer from my teenage years. And so I did not take that route early on. But I always felt like I was missing something in my life. And I knew that I wanted to kind of go on to teaching in academia. And you really need to have a master's degree at least to get into a university teaching job. So, long story short, I went back to school, got my bachelor's, got my master's at NYU, and now I've been teaching at the Clive Davis Institute at NYU for the last 10 years, a little over 10 years now. So, crazy.
So that is crazy. Good for you to go back to school after all of that. I mean, sounds like you did the reverse order. You
I
got
did.
started in the industry as a teenager, and then you went back to school later on. So, are you
Yeah.
actually teaching in person in
Yeah.
New York City? Is that where
Oh,
the
yeah.
site is?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The only time we've been online was during the COVID lockdown. So, thankfully, that's over.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
Uh, just a curiosity question to get a little off script. About a year ago, we interviewed an online vocal teacher. His name is Ken Tamplin,
Oh,
who
yeah.
now it's funny that that episode is one of our top viewed episodes because there's a lot of controversy surrounding Ken. Now, I didn't
Yes.
know that at the time I did the interview, but like what makes the difference between somebody like Ken who came from the hair metal scene and now there's claims that he's a fraud and that kind of thing versus somebody like
Oh,
you who's gone through it?
I didn't know there were claims that he's a fraud. I had no
Yeah.
idea about that. I've seen his videos online, like a number of them, and I actually, to tell you the truth, I downloaded some of his instructional stuff because I was just very curious about where he was coming from a pedagogical point of view, you
Mhm.
know? And I mean, when I hear him sing on his videos, he sounds amazing. I mean, if that's really him singing, which I'm imagining, I don't know how you could fake it. Um, but he seems like he knows what he's doing. But then when I listen to some of his instructions, I do question the health, mainly the health of some of the stuff that he's telling people to do. And I also noticed some things technically that, when he's singing that I also question. So, without getting too detailed about it. Um, yeah, I don't know. I can't really
Yeah.
tell you. I don't know him well enough to really speak from, a point of expertise about what he's doing. But it's interesting. And
Yeah.
there's so many vocal teachers on YouTube. Many of them I've looked at their stuff and it's really it's a little scary what some of them are telling
Yeah.
people.
So now, who are your students? Kids that are going through the art school, through the performing arts school.
Yeah, the Clive Davis Institute is an undergrad program that is part of Tisch at NYU.
Okay.
And so it is part of the Performing Arts School, but it's a very unique program in that they're teaching kids or giving kids sort of a 360 education, basically hoping to give them all the tools that they're going to need to have a career in the music industry today. So they're learning recording arts, they have to learn how to record, how to produce, how to, and a lot of stuff along with that. Songwriting, performance, marketing and branding, all the things that they're basically going to need to hopefully make a living in the industry. So it's a really amazing program. I wish there was something like this, around when I was that, college age. I probably would have done that route. But it's a wonderful facility. We have three full-blown recording studios, and it's a beautiful space, and it's a wonderful place to work. So
Well, that's. I
I'm
mean,
very lucky.
yeah. I mean, listen, you don't get as good as NYU for business school or the Tisch Art School. We had
Yeah,
filmmaker Adam Dubin on about a year and a half ago. So, famous guy that's done all kinds of work with Metallica and the Beastie Boys. He went through
yeah,
the school. So there's definitely you're in some good company. That's
yes,
nice to hear. So,
yes.
now I wanted to talk about, you said you got started professionally at 18. I noticed on your resume, maybe you did some touring with the Glenn Miller Orchestra. And I know Glenn had been dead forever ago, but
Yeah.
look, looking at it from the rock world point of view, looks like you had your first big jump in 1985. Foreigner, they put out the album Agent Provocateur, and that one was very different because they were arena rock in the 70s. This was a ballad. The song, we all know it, I Want to Know What Love Is. And this one was on MTV all the time. It had the New Jersey gospel choir singing to it. And it changed the whole landscape of, let's say, pop rock songs that ended up getting played on TV. So,
Yeah.
your role with Foreigner, it says that you were leading the choir ensemble. So, talk about that.
Yeah, well, I want to back up just a little bit because actually, in 1984, through a friend of mine who unfortunately just passed, Jed DeFilippis, who worked in the business as a production manager, stage manager. He did a lot of really big tours and stuff. But in 1984, Jed was working in production for the Jackson Victory Tour. And I had just come back to New York City from being in Arizona for a year, and I was looking for work. And Jed called me and he said, "Hey, we're at Giant Stadium. We need a production assistant. Are you available for the week?" And I said, yeah, perfect. And so I went out there. I worked as a production assistant, and then the production manager said, you did a great job. Do you want to do the rest of the tour? So I ended up working for the Jackson Victory Tour in the production team for 6 months. And through that, I met a number of people. And, this is where I always tell my students that even though the business is quite different now, it's still reliant on networking, on relationships. And that's never going to change, I think. It's still about people.
Right.
So one of the guys that was on the Jackson Victory Tour as a tech ended up doing the Foreigner tour, and he recommended me for this job because the band wanted to have a choir on stage every night. This was a world tour. This was a year-long tour all over the United States, Europe, Japan, Australia. I mean, it was a year-long tour. It was a very big stadium and arena tour. And they had no idea how to go about putting together a choir every night. So obviously it would be an extremely expensive venture to carry 20 people or, whatever. So my friend Steve Nider recommended me. I went in, I talked to Bud Prager, who was managing Foreigner at the time in New York. And, he told me what the gig was, and they had no idea what to do. And they just basically said to me, if you can figure this out, if you can put this together for the tour, you got the job. So I took the job. I was in my 20s. I had no freaking idea how I was going to handle this. But I figured it out. And this is, it's funny because I'm writing a book right now. I'm actually writing about my story and not only my music life, but my personal life. So this is in the book. This story is in the book,
Huh?
but this is, this time period, 85, this is pre-smartphones, this is pre-internet and Google. So I had to track down choirs through universities and through churches. And I started working 2 or 3 months before the tour was actually ready to hit the road. And I had to, by phone, track down choirs, make a deal on the phone, and then send them a cassette tape of the song with a chart of the music. And that's how I put it all together. And then the day of the show, the choirs would come and meet me in the afternoon. We would have a rehearsal for the music. Then we would have a rehearsal for staging to get them up on stage, how that was all going to work, and do sound check with the band, the whole thing. And when I look back, it's amazing that I pulled it off.
I was going to say because, okay, number one, you got to carry like the old days, the yellow and white pages phone book with you from the
Yeah.
local town. So you got to get it from the hotel or the venue. But let's say you're playing 6 shows a week. You got
Oh,
to be
yeah.
planning 4 or 5 days out. And what if something goes wrong? What's the
Oh,
backup
no.
plan?
I had to plan months in advance, not just days. It was months. And it was a lot of phone calls. It was a lot of hustling. But it happened. It came off. The band loved it. The management, everybody was happy. It was a tremendous high point in the show when the choir would come out for that song. And in different cities, we would have a different number of people. I know in Madison Square Garden, we have about 200 singers that I
Mm.
organize, and that was pretty tremendous. So yeah, it was fun. It was fun. It's a good
Wow.
memory.
I mean, that was a catalyst for so many of those things to come down the line with different bands, and Foreigner still continuing now and they do that.
Yeah.
Do you have any memories of, let's say, the vibe from between Lou Gramm and Mick Jones? Were they cool guys?
Oh, they were great. Everyone was great with me, but listen, it was the 80s. There there was a lot of partying going on. It was pretty crazy. It was a pretty crazy time in music culture, in social culture. And in looking back, and I can't really, go too much into detail, but there was some tension going on back then for sure. And I think, it kind of played out
Yeah.
after that tour. I think a lot of people know sort of what happened down the
Yeah.
line. Um, but the guys were always great with me, and I never had a problem. So, yeah.
Wow. That's good. Cool. So now moving along, let's say the next step in your career was with Pat Benatar. So it was the Seven the Hard Way 1986 tour. Now, again, I had to refresh my memory, but this was the height of MTV. Invincible from the Legend of Billie Jean movie was all the rage. It was a weird video. Pat
Yeah.
Benatar kind of moved out of her early 80s spandex and into more of a ragged look, I remember on this. But I guess, being a young female coming up the ranks, how special was it to get, let's say, a little bit mentored from somebody like Pat Benatar? Like, what influence did she have on you?
Oh, Patty was so great. This was such a, I think, pivotal moment in her career because, definitely through the early 80s, maybe the late 70s, but that time period before that tour I did with her, I mean, she was to me, the best rock and roll female singer out there. Patty next to Ann Wilson. I mean, to me, they were the best. Um, but right around 85, 86, and this Seven the Hard Way tour was a time period for Patty when she had just had her first baby. Things were really changing in the business. I know she had some difficulties with the record label and with her management at that time. So it was a really kind of a transitional period for her. So I think consequently, her look, I wouldn't necessarily say it was ragged. I would say that it was more conservative because she kind of traded in her spandex for a little more maybe mom look, if you want to put it
Hmm.
that way.
Yep.
Um, but her life was changing, and it's tough for artists, I think, to change and evolve because people become very critical. The audiences become very critical when they're not seeing someone the way they're used to seeing them.
Yeah.
But Patty was great to work with. She was just very kind and just, an amazing singer. And, she and Neil, her husband, the guitar player in the band,
Yep.
they're still together
Yeah.
and still amazing and still making music.
Yeah, they're a fixture on the tour circuit. Pat
Yeah,
Benatar, Neil Giraldo, they're always out there. I always say I want to be like him when I get in my upper 60s and low 70s. He's cool looking. He's got a spike haircut
very,
and tattoos all over. Even I, as a
totally.
55-year-old guy, I could still get there. I'm going to be like Spider someday. But
Absolutely. Absolutely.
so, moving on to Pink Floyd, it was the Momentary Lapse of Reason 1987-88 tour that you participated in it. But listen, this was a monumental period, a landmark time for Pink Floyd. I mean, it was their first major tour in 6 or 7 years. And it was also the official separation from Roger Waters. A new album came out. And there was a lot of, let's say, maybe all eyes were on them. They had to reprove themselves again to say, oh my God, what's it going to be like with David Gilmour taking front and center? So, I
Yeah.
mean, joining Pink Floyd for you was a massive accomplishment. So, off the bat, take us through the steps of joining that band. How did that whole thing happen?
Yeah, again, it's going to be in the book.
Okay,
So you're getting a preview. Um,
excellent.
again, it's here we go with networks, relationships, and people to people relationships in the business. And um, so going back to Patty's tour and connections through Foreigner, but Buford Jones had been Patty's front of house sound mixer, right? So after that tour, he got the gig with Pink Floyd, and I had no idea that my name was thrown into the ring. And apparently Buford had recommended me to David when they were mixing the record in LA with Bob Ezrin. They were just sort of getting to that point where they were putting the band together for the tour. And out of the blue, I got a phone call from the tour manager, said that David Gilmour wanted to meet me, and could I come to the studio in West LA, excuse me, where they were mixing the record. And I did, and I met with him, and it was surreal,
Yeah.
because it just completely came out of the blue. And I remember talking to David in the lounge of the studio, and we just kind of had a friendly conversation. I never had to sing anything for him.
Wow.
Um, there was just barely any discussion. about music or what would be required for the gig. He absolutely just had faith in the recommendation through Buford, and I got the gig. I mean, it was really that simple. And when I look back on that time, it was like I said, it was so surreal because it was like so easy. It was so, it
I
just
was going
sort
to
of,
say, that was going to be one of my questions is how did the audition go? And here it is. You didn't even need an audition.
I did not. I did not. It was so wild. But David was such a gentleman and he was just easy going. And, and then I'm sure a lot of people know the story of the band rehearsing in Toronto in an airplane hangar for a month. We were there before the tour started. Production was there before us because it was an incredibly massive production with lasers and pyro and things hanging over our heads, lights, I mean, there was so much stuff on stage. At times it was a little bit frightening because our lives were in the hands of the riggers, and people, working on the crew. So, but we spent a month in Toronto rehearsing, and at the beginning of the tour, it was just myself and Rachel Fury, who was the British girl that was one of the background singers, and that's the way the tour started. And then when we did the show in Atlanta, uh, that was filmed, so they wanted to have more singers on stage. So they brought in three additional singers, and that's when Durga ended up getting the gig and coming on the tour. So,
Right. But just
yeah.
going back to the rehearsals, because you're right, that's almost got like a little bit of a legendary folklore in there. I mean, was there any? I'm just imagining. I mean, a month to rehearse number one. Like, did any funny moments or hiccups happen in like the production? Like, I don't know, like the flying pig deflated and fell on stage, or the lasers went wonky or something. Anything funny happen?
I think one time, I think the pig did get stuck somewhere and somehow on the wire, and it was always so funny, watching the pig come come down the pike, where however they set it up in, every venue was a little bit different. But the pig had such huge testicles. And it was very funny to watch the whole thing from the stage and people's reactions. It was great. Um, I can't really remember anything in particular that went wonky. I'm sure there was, but I had enough to think about on stage.
I was going to say that too. Like, I mean, leading up to the first show, I mean, your nerves, I mean, you had to be on nerves. Let's be honest, right? Like, what was your mental state? I think the first show was in Ottawa. I was looking at the list. Like, were you throwing up backstage or I don't know, doing something crazy to
No,
get calm the nerves down?
no, no, not throwing up or anything dramatic like that. But yeah, I think, everybody was nervous. It was, like you said, it was a big undertaking for David, Nick, and Rick to put themselves out there with the Pink Floyd name. And also, right in that time period was when they were in the middle of a huge lawsuit with Roger. And I remember, them having conversations with management at the time, and it was a very tumultuous time. And nobody really knew whether or not the tour was going to be successful without Roger. And I mean, it's history now, but it did very, very well.
Yeah.
And hugely successful, and I'm listen, I respect Roger and I think he's an amazing artist. And I also respect him for his political views. He's extremely political. I'm sure everyone
Mhm.
knows that. But for me, and it's, I'm a little bit biased, but I love David and always loved hearing him sing the material and play the material. And it was just, so great to work with him and hear him every night.
What were
So
what were I mean, because I didn't see that tour. I was only 17. I remember it happening, being in New Jersey. I didn't go. I don't know why, but um like was David the natural leader, or like what was the role of Rick and Nick Mason? Were they kind of like a three-man partnership? Because you had a lot of other guys too. Guy Pratt, who still plays with David Gilmour to this day,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, and then John Corinne, who was the original keyboardist. He's kind of been in both camps. He went over to the Roger camp for many years, and I think
yeah.
maybe back. So who was the natural leader of the band?
That's hard to say. I mean, I think between the three of them, I think, there was this mutuality. There was a sense of mutual respect and mutual involvement. Um, and they're British, so the British have after I've worked with a number of British bands over the years, um, there's a very different kind of mentality and attitude with the Brits. And
Yeah.
generally speaking, I mean, people are people, but generally speaking, there isn't, and there wasn't this overt sense of egotism with those guys. I felt they really treated us all with respect and equality, and
Mhm.
but absolutely, I respected all three of them as my boss, right? My
Mhm.
bosses. But there wasn't this overt sense of like David vying to be the boss, or Nick or Rick.
Okay.
They were really good friends.
Yeah.
And particularly David and Rick were very close.
Yeah.
And, and I think when Rick died, that seemed to be sort of the coffin, or the nail in the coffin, I should say, of the Pink Floyd band.
Yeah, because David, from that point on, he took himself out under his solo name.
Yeah,
Just a question. I mean, I saw David Gilmour at the Garden only a couple months ago. Did you happen to see those shows, and have you
I know.
reacquainted yourself with him?
No, I went in 2016 when he was there, and I saw him then. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
it's a good shows. Now, how about when, like, in singing live though, for a production like that? Like, I know in a lot of the Pink Floyd type songs, the background singers, they kind of come in and out, and then they're featured sometimes. Like, did you have any like spotlight songs that you played on, or you were out front and center? Like, what was your role?
No, well, we were never front and center. I mean, the three of us were definitely background singers.
Yeah,
Um, the only real moments that we were featured individually was like on Great Gig in the Sky,
right.
that song. And little kind of step out moments, maybe with a lick here or there, somewhere in a particular song. But that said, the way David had us set up on that tour was we were right in front. So we were in the front. We weren't standing in the back. So we were definitely, I guess, featured in that way.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. You look at the tour routing when you look back there, 30 something years ago. You guys played, I mean, 3, 4 nights at major hockey arenas. Then you moved over to Australia, Japan, back to the States. Now you're playing the football stadiums. I think one of the cool things is, at the time, as you know, like anytime a band released a live album, and which eventually turned into, let's say, a VHS tape release.
Right.
Delicate Sound of Thunder was a classic live album. The album cover with the guy with the bulbs is awesome. I
Yeah.
mean, how does that make you feel, knowing like you're part of that? You're immortalized forever in history on this piece of Pink Floyd.
It's pretty cool. It's funny how, from that tour, I had other things, I had other opportunities, and other things in my life that kind of took me on a detour. And um, I didn't really think about it then, but now, as I'm reflecting on my life and I'm writing this book, and I've also, in the last several years, I've gotten a lot of calls to come and be a guest vocalist with some Pink Floyd tribute bands, which for a long time I resisted doing, but I have done them now, a handful of those kind of tribute band gigs. Um, I realized that it is such an honor, and it is really um, an incredible part of rock and roll history. It's an incredible time in my life. Um, and now I can say that I feel very proud and very fortunate to have had that a part of my career history. So it's, when I'm old and gray, I can look back and say I was rocking then.
That's it. That's it. It is. It's you got to embrace it, right? It was a special
Yeah,
time of the band, and Pink Floyd's always going to have a mass appeal, no matter how old they
yeah,
get, how long they retire, and that kind of thing. So,
I think
well, I
so.
appreciate you opening up in detail about that tour. So, listen, I'm a big rock metal guy, but one of my favorite artists of all time, actually my first favorite band ever as a 12-year-old was The Police in 1982.
Oh, wow.
I went out and I bought the Ghost in the Machine cassette at Kmart. But you remember that story. But it's funny in looking at your resume, you played on Sting's Brand New Day tour, which was 1999 and 2000. I saw that tour in Newark, New Jersey at the NJ Pack. So chances are you were there. So I think that how cool is that? But that was kind of a I don't know if it was a comeback album for Sting, but Desert Rose was a huge hit that kind of he needed that big hit. It had been several years
Yeah,
since he had one. He got that one. And I always appreciate Sting because he has a penchant for changing his bands around all the time. I just saw him over in
all the
Brooklyn
time.
back in November. He was just a trio. Other times he brings out the orchestras with the singers. But I would say my question to you is as an artist like him that had such a massive global reach, circling the globe must have been a dream for you. Can you comment on that?
Well, luckily I had circled the globe a few other times. Um,
True.
and and the truth is that I actually was only on the tour for 6 months. And it's a long, long story that I'm going to save for the book,
Okay.
because it is a pretty transformational, cathartic moment for me. And but I will say that for the time that I was on that tour, um, listen, Sting is a great songwriter. He's a great musician. He was playing bass and singing on that tour, because there have been times before where he wasn't. Um,
Right.
so he's a rock star, and he's been a rock star since he's what, 25, 24 when the Police came out. Did the math. I mean, he's been a rock star pretty much all his adult life. So you can't take anything away from him for sure. But
Yeah.
I can't really reveal the whole story of what happened right now.
Okay.
You'll have to
Okay.
wait for the book.
All right. Well, we'll have you back on to promote the book. But did you ever have any English tea with Sting in the afternoon? Talk about
Oh,
his his Olive Garden and his tantric sex and all that other
right.
stuff.
Right. Everybody wants to know about his sex den and the tantric sex. Yeah, it's probably all true.
No, it's all
Um,
kidding aside, though.
no, yeah. And listen, again, another Brit. I've worked with a bunch of Brits, and he's a gentleman, and um, I'm just let's just say I'm happy to have that on my resume as well. So
Okay.
we'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. Okay. All right. That sounds good. So, the other thing tying back to Pink Floyd, it's no secret that you're married to a member of Government Mule, Danny Lewis. He's the keyboardist, multi-instrumentalist. I think the
Yes.
last time I saw Government Mule at the Beacon Theater, not this time around, last 2 years ago, all I remember is I think it was during the encore. He came out and he played a trombone at the end. I think
Yeah.
I'm right.
Yes.
Okay, so I look forward
Yeah.
that someday I'll get him on the show for an interview. But in the meantime,
Sure.
um, they went out in 2023 for their Dark Side of the Mule tour. I saw the show up in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Oh,
It
you
was
did?
fucking awesome. Yeah, I was
Oh,
there.
wow.
Fucking awesome show.
Oh,
Jason Bonham's
cool.
experience.
Oh,
But,
yeah.
I mean, you were there. I didn't know that until I researched it.
No.
But, there's so many songs that I could imagine that you probably sang on: Shine on You Crazy Diamond, Great Gig in the Sky, Us and Them, Welcome to the Machine, Money. Any of the songs that probably needed the female background singers. But, how is it coming out of the Pink Floyd world and then going into the Government Mule world? Because Government Mule, they're a jam band, but they're not, and they're very
Yeah.
improvisational. So how does that work for somebody like you in that setting?
Well, for me, I mean, I was pretty much we and my friend Sophia Ramos, who was the other singer on that, we were pretty much doing what was called for on those songs. The difference with Government Mule playing those songs is that Warren and the band in general, you know, they didn't want to make it a karaoke thing, which I totally respect and totally get because that's not what Mule does. Their thing is when they do songs, cover songs, you know, they do their own interpretation of whatever that is, right? And they do a lot of covers. A lot of jam bands do a lot of covers. And there is a lot of improvisation that goes on. And Warren is such a great singer and great guitar player. He really did justice to all that material. There aren't a lot of guys that could cover that, that I could think of, that could do the vocals and the guitar in a way that would, be respectful to David Gilmour, and his take. But yeah, Mule they're not a karaoke band. So I thought it was really cool the way they did the material. And it really did. So it didn't really affect the background vocals that much, you
Yeah,
know.
it was a great show, and I really enjoyed that one. That venue was
That's
nice.
great.
Like, I mean, in a weird way, how's it like being out on the road for 3 weeks with your husband? Do you still hang out, or are you guys almost like business people where you go to separate dressing rooms?
No. Well, we did have separate dressing rooms because my partner, Sophia, my partner in crime, and we had our own dressing room. The girls, girls had
Right.
their own space and the boys did their thing. But Danny and I, when we did have a hotel room, we did room together. So,
Well, you saved on the cost there, less
yeah,
overhead for the accountant.
exactly, exactly. So, yeah, but
Oh,
no, it's fun. It's fun working with Danny. So, the band is kind of off right now, because Warren's been out doing a solo tour. So they've been, Warren's been promoting his solo thing. So Government Mule hasn't really been doing that much in the last year. They have some stuff coming up in the summer and fall. So Danny's been around a lot, and so we're trying to figure out how to work on some new tunes together. And
okay.
yeah,
All
because we
right.
have a studio here in the basement of the house, so we're trying to make some beautiful music together.
All right. Well, I was interested to hear about that. He seems like
Yeah.
you're both accomplished musicians, so what's going to come out of it is going to be killer, I'm sure.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
So, hey, I wanted to ask you a couple questions because you go down your list, and I know you've done a lot of spots on commercials and movies. Some of the ones that caught my eye were like Natural Born Killers and Home Alone 2 and Old Milwaukee Beer and ShopRite and Kentucky Fried Chicken. But the one that I have to ask you about particularly is Soul Train. Like, you were on Soul
Oh,
Train, like you hung with Don Cornelius.
hung with Don Cornelius. How about that? What a trip. He was a trip. Yeah. So how that came about was I was with a band. This is after Floyd. I was signed to a band. I was living in Los Angeles then, and I joined a band called Hiroshima, and they're a Japanese American. Um, they were categorized as sort of new age jazz, and they were signed to Epic Records at the time. And At the time I thought, well, I'll be a lead singer and this is kind of interesting. And, so I kind of took a detour and signed with them for a few years and did one record with them. And that was when I did Soul Train and met Don. So,
Dance with him? Did you dance with him up there?
no, I didn't dance with it. That would have been fun. That would have been fun. Yeah. Yeah, that was fun. It was a great show. I mean, I used to watch it. So,
Yeah, it was
yeah.
always on Channel 11 and in the background on Saturday afternoons. What about some of
Right.
these movies? Like, what do you contribute for our Natural Born Killers? Like, you sang in it, or like, what's
Yeah,
that?
no. Well, that was a song that Leonard Cohen wrote and recorded, and I just got called as a session singer on a session. That's really how that stuff happens. So, yeah, back in the day, there was a lot more work for that.
Yeah,
Now everybody has a studio in their house and recording equipment, and so getting called for sessions is kind of unusual now.
yeah,
Although once in a while someone may call me and say, "Hey, can you put some background vocals on something?" And I record it here in my house. So, yeah. But it was
yeah.
fun back in the day that having that work.
Sure, sure. I mean,
Yeah.
and just some of these, I have a warped sense of humor, but I'm imagining like you rehearsing for your ShopRite ad. Like, you were you promoting the can sale, or Old Milwaukee beer? Was it Memorial Day weekend and there's a coupon special like
Yeah, probably.
KFC? Like, and then do you go through this 100 times? And Danny's going, what are you talking about here?
No, back in the day, there was a lot of what we called jingle work, and
Yeah,
you would get called by a producer or the writer, of the jingle, and you'd go in and they would either give you a piece of music or they would teach you the song. And if you were working in a section with a few other singers, you get your sound together and you record your parts, and usually it was pretty quick, like maybe a couple hours work. And if the commercial flew, you made residuals, and it was a great way to make some money. That doesn't really happen that much anymore. So there's
yeah,
so much more licensing that goes on. Sync fees and licensing fees. So that's much more prevalent now in the business. So,
yeah.
but
I
yeah.
see that.
Yeah, but
I see that.
actually, doing jingles was how I met Danny, because he was
No.
writing jingles before he joined Government Mule. He was working for a jingle house in New York City, and that's how I met him.
Wow, who knew there was a jingle house? I never knew. Never knew there was a jingle house. How
Yeah,
about
lots
that?
of them. There used to be a lot of them in New York and
Wow.
LA. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty cool stuff. You're teaching me something new. So, Machan, I have a listener question from a good friend of mine, Mark
Uh-huh.
Ballo, who has his own podcast. He's the Jersey Boys podcast. He's a big 80s hair metal guy. And I was
Uh-huh.
telling him that on your resume, it said that you sang on the SouthGang Tainted Angel album. So he wanted to know how well you got to know Butch Walker and Desmond Child, because Butch Walker launched a big career after that.
There was none of those guys were in the studio when we did our background vocals on that. And it was, I forgot what song it was. Does it say on my resume? Because I can't think of it now.
I don't think
Um,
it does.
no, I just got a call from a producer, and they were looking for some background vocals. And I got called, and I called a friend of mine who's a singer in New York, Elaine Caswell, and we went in and we did some vocals. Desmond wasn't there, the band wasn't there. It was just, it was one of those things that's actually how a lot of those things happen. You're not always in the studio at the same time. It's crazy, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, listen, this has been a great hour of you sharing your whole rock and roll history in a matter of 60 minutes, and you probably have a ton of stories. So, what's going on with the book? What else for 2025? Are you doing any shows? When's this book going to come out? What else do you want to promote?
I'm trying to finish the book now. I'm pretty close to the end. And I do have a publisher, and so the next step would be to submit it for the editor, and then there's going to be probably a bunch of revisions going on. And I'm hoping maybe at the end of the year, the book may come out. So I'll keep you posted, though, for sure.
Okay. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Great. So for more information on Machan, head over to machantaylor.com for all of her information and links to her socials. So Machan, it's been a great conversation. I much appreciate it. So today for my guest, Machan Taylor, I'm Metal Walt, and this is Metal Mayhem ROC.
Thank you.
Metal for life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.